don't see that person in here with us now, so maybe we'll hold off on that. I noticed that Kenny submitted.
That was me. That's
that was you.
I'm under Lance Bruce, but this is actually Tracy Bruce.
Yeah. So, you know, I'll caveat what I'm about to say by starting with the fact that I'm not a medical professional, but I had a lot of like abnormal hair growth or function, including, you know, about half the hair on my head falling out. And as far as I can tell, and as far as the science, as far as we know scientifically, Morgellons has some effect on skin fibroblasts, skin stem cells, in which the chemical signaling for the type of skin cell that it's going to turn into and where it goes is hijacked or disrupted, which results in the growth of a good deal. You know, skin fibroblasts can turn into all kinds of stuff like keratin, like regular skin. It can turn into like the little hairs in your ear that help you to hear. So to the extent that the chemical signaling is disrupted for skin and hair being a part of the skin and the follicles growing out of it, I imagine that's what's happening with the abnormal hair. Again, I'm not a doctor or a microbiologist, but in my research of it, because that was something that was really disturbing to me, losing half your hair. I looked into that quite a bit. As you can see now, I got all my hair back. So yeah, the antibiotics helped quite a bit. And even the areas that looked like they were just going to be bald forever seem to recover just fine. Hey, Marianne.
There we go. Hi.
There was also a question from Kenny Egger, who I see is with us, who said that, you know, because the front line of from the medical community that sees Morgellons patients is so frequently dermatologists, what should we do to get the dermatology community involved? So one of the articles that was actually written by Marianne, who's with us here today, was published in a dermatological journal. So I think that's one way that we can involve them, is to speak to dermatologists on their level, using scientifically rigorous methods and, you know, good labs, clear certified labs and all of that. In terms of swaying public opinion or getting public consciousness to catch up, because doctors, like any other humans, are affected by public opinion. I think that's why this documentary is so important. The more people who see it, the more people who can show it to dermatologists who might doubt, I think would be swayed and would help sway public opinion. Hey, Nancy, it's good to see you again. Would help sway public opinion.
Absolutely, that's what I agree with as well, Ed, that you know, like what happened with ulcers, right? Barry Marshall, the gastroenterologist in the 80s, who found that there was a bacterial infection that was the source of 85% of all ulcers, wrote a lot of papers and presented them at conferences. And they were ridiculed, they were sloughed off as marginal fringe science, and they weren't believed. And it wasn't until he created a story that went viral, which, in other words, he took a vial filled with Helicobacter pylori, the thing that he claimed causes ulcers, and he stirred it up in there and he made a nice little drink and he swilled it on down and gave himself an ulcer using that technique, and which was kind of a crazy thing to do. And then he cured himself with antibiotics, and that was something that people could relate to. Wow, you gave yourself an illness to prove that it's true. And that was picked up. That story of Barry Marshall doing that was picked up by newspapers, and it was spread all across the world. And that kind of woke people up. We're like, well, maybe we should take another look at this science that we've been labeling as fringe and dismissing. And I think that a film like Unrest for, you know, myalgic encephalomyelitis or chronic fatigue syndrome can help change people's minds. And a film like Skin Deep, The Battle Over Morgellons, can help change people's minds, because it changes their heart first. And that's the hope anyway, is that we can engage people on an emotional level, engage people on sort of an interesting story level, and then they'll perk up and say, well, what is this research that Marianne Middelveen and Ray Stricker and these other collaborators are doing? Let's take another look at it. Because You can't just shout facts at people and expect them to internalize it. But speaking of the dermatological community, Mr. Egger, it was really interesting. I've talked to a couple of people, and they are dermatologists, and they say, Morgellons has come up at dermatological conferences before, and people get shouted down when they bring it up and they believe in it. And I was like, excuse me, wait, this has come up at dermatological conferences before? And she said, yeah, absolutely. But there's such a huge prejudice against it that the evidence can't be presented. There was sort of anecdotal evidence where dermatologists were talking about having seen it in their offices, but they weren't listened to at the conferences. So I would love, it's hard to kind of break into the dermatological community. I think we have one, there was one person, a dermatologist, she saw it. I'm blanking on her name right now, but she works here in Burbank, California, and she saw the film, and I'd talked to her before she even saw the film, and she had seen and believes in Morgellons disease because she'd seen it in her offices, but she sort of felt powerless to treat it because she didn't know treatments, and she felt powerless to kind of stand up and say it's real because she didn't really have the scientific evidence to back it up, and she had other fish to fry. But she is an ambassador to the, I think it's the American Association of Dermatologists or a similar organization. So I think this is the time we can start making inroads into that community. That's my hope.
Well, part of the problem is that, you're challenging a prevailing point of view, and that's always extremely difficult in medicine. And it just takes a long time to turn people around. And as far as ridicule, nobody's really ridiculed us. We haven't been treated as badly as Barry Marshall was. So that is, a step forward. And there are a lot of dermatologists out there who actually believe the evidence and they understand it. It's just that when to get up there in a dermatological meeting or to take that point of view takes quite a lot of guts still at this stage. So, it's little by little we're changing the opinion of many people. But it takes good, strong science, and it also takes public awareness, and it takes people like Pi making a movie. It takes all of us.
For what I look like. Edward, I dropped off of here for a few seconds and missed what you said about the testing on hair. I don't want you to waste time and go too deep into it, but could you paraphrase what you said?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, sure. So the idea is that Morgellon, we don't know exactly the mechanism by which it's changing the way that skin forms, but based on what I understand, it has some effect on skin fibroblasts, which are skin stem cells, which are the cells that will eventually grow and replace the skin that you have. And there's a certain sort of signaling that goes on that tells your skin, your fibroblasts, what kind of skin to turn into. For example, fingernails at the end of your fingers are going to be different than skin on your forearm, or the skin that turns into the little hairs in your ear that help you hear. So the original question was, have there been studies into why it's affecting hair as it is? And the reason I looked into it is because I was one of those Morgellons sufferers who had a lot of his hair fall out, and a lot of sort of bizarre and baffling hair and hair types grow into place. So that's as far as I understand. I don't know, Marianne, if you have a deeper understanding of it, might be able to supplement just what I just said.
Well, we know, when we do some of our experiments, we can tell which cells are infected with Borrelia. So Borrelia tends to be heavily infect the keratinocytes, and they're in the lowest cell layer of the epidermis. And when you look at a skin cross-section, you'll sort of see that basal cell layer. And then when you get to a follicle, those same keratinocytes surround the follicle. So you get intracellular infection of those keratinocytes throughout the skin and throughout the lesions. And we know that, like you mentioned, it changes the way gene regulation occurs. So there's many, many different types of keratin, and there's many types of collagen. And all that, when your body produces a certain protein, there's gene regulations that genes are turned on and they're turned off. So some of these genes that are normally off probably turn on, and some that are normally on turn off. And so there's a dysregulation of the genes, an upshift or a downshift of protein production. So that's basically what happens. And we do know that there are other skin diseases that can cause filamentous growth that's unusual. There's cholesteatoma in ears, and infection can cause this hairy growth to occur inside the ear. And then we know that HIV patients sometimes get hairy leukoplakia inside on the sides of their tongue. So, you know, we do have precedent for that sort of thing happening, but we do know where the infected skin layers are. And as far as the filaments go, in my latest paper, which is on the staging and classification, if you read that, it will show some of these unusual filaments that Morgellons patients get. And those, there's a lot of Borrelia present right in those fibers. Wow. So when we stain specifically for Borrelia, those things light up cherry red, which means that they're full of Borrelia. And if I look on my microscope with a very high-powered lens, at the base of attachment of those fibers, they're continuous with the surrounding keratinocytes. So the keratinocytes are forming like a little tube, and that tube's composed of keratinocytes, and they are intracellularly infected. So, you know, we find Borrelia right at the source of the unusual filament production.
Okay, my hair actually has a white kind of lacy looking sheath surrounding the whole root, and that when it will pull out easily if I want to get a sample. It's not hard, and my whole follicular unit comes out with the hair. Have y'all tested any hair samples that have this sheath? Because I'm suspect that there are nerve cells involved, and that might explain the sensation.
Well, I'm not sure about the sensation, but we have looked at some of those unusual sheaths around the hair follicles, and that kind of funny sheath that you described would be called a follicular cast.
Okay.
So that's what it's called, a follicular cast. And in those, we do see that there's Borrelia infection in those. And then also those sheaths are composed of keratin. And then inside the sheath, it's unusual, but usually collagen's mostly produced in the dermis, not in the epidermis. But inside those, so usually you'd find the collagen below that, but in some of these unusual sheaths, there's collagen inside the sheath. So there's a little bit, you know, some proteins are not where they're supposed to be.
Yes.
In layman's terms.
I understand.
And there's a thickening of that, of the hair follicle sheath. It just thickens, and it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And in some patients, you know, they get almost grotesquely thick, where they, under the microscope, they'd look like, they'd look like a stalactite in a cave. So,
all right.
It's actually painful, and I think that some of the hair loss is hair pulling. And
some of those too. When you get that thick follicular cast, normally a hair will grow up from the follicle. So it grows up towards the air, towards the surface. But on those thickened follicular casts, we often find that there's a clear hair that grows downward right into the dermis. So, I mean, that is not supposed to happen, and that would not feel good.
Oh, and yeah. Okay, thank you, Marianne.
All
You
right.
are welcome.
Thank you, Marianne, for answering that question. Someone, Annie Jeeves, was kind enough to take those questions from Crowdcast, where we just had our big technical issues, push us over here to Zoom, and she's taken them and pasted them here. So I wanted to take a moment and answer some of the questions that you guys had submitted on Crowdcast. So the one that got the most upvotes, excuse me, was this, submitted by Kenny Egger. Has there been any attempt to get the CDC to redo their test with a representative sample of subjects that actually have fibers coming out of their skin? So as we know, they, from the film we go into this, they misdefined the Morgellons patient population as those who believe they have fibers in their skin, as opposed to those actually having fibers embedded in their skin. And the question is, has there been an attempt to get the CDC to redo I think there's,
I haven't asked for them to do it. Cindy might, the Charles E. Holman Foundation might encourage it, but in science, when you do controlled experiments and you publish in peer-reviewed journals, we're required to write a detailed methodology that should be easy to follow. So if the CDC were to do it, and if they were to follow the detailed methodology that we have provided, using the same reagents, using the same type of controls and doing the same procedures, they would have similar results.
So I think if we were to reapproach the CDC, there would have to be kind of a shift in the attitude about the original research, the original study, right? So I hope the film can change that, but I think something else that's happened recently might also change public opinion about the infallibility of the CDC. And that was with coronavirus, the CDC sent out a first set of tests that were faulty and just didn't work. And so now I think the popular belief is, sure, the CDC does good work, but they're not infallible. They don't make 100% correct decisions 100% of the time. We've seen a giant mistake that they made, and they also weren't prepared for this coronavirus pandemic as well as they should have been. So knowing that they're fallible and that they're human like everybody else, perhaps we should take another look at the Morgellons study that they did and put out in 2012. And I think it's up to each and every one of the people here on this Zoom conversation, and each and everybody on the Facebook page, and who are Morgellons activists or advocates, to make a step forward, to take a step, and perhaps if Cindy Casey and the Charles E. Holman's Morgellons Disease Foundation is watching this, can create an organized effort to reapproach the CDC. Now, I think we have.
I certainly want them to use the correct techniques.
The
fault with their original study was they did look for Lyme disease, but they used the two-tiered test, which is very insensitive. And out of their group of, how the number of subjects dwindled. Well, there was actually one who had an equivocal test result. So, that in itself was statistically significant, because, the incidence rate of Lyme in the U.S. of people that test positive is not that high. So, but you'd certainly want, if they were going to do it, you'd want them to do the correct techniques and not do the same sort of. You wouldn't want them to repeat what they've already done and then have a disappointing result again. That's for sure.
That's for sure. Now, Nancy Egger, you're with us. You are part of the Charles E. Holman Morgellons Disease Foundation. Have you and Cindy reapproached or written letters or made any steps forward to contacting the CDC since 2012?
No, we haven't. Unfortunately, there are only 3 of us that do all the day-to-day work for the foundation. Don't know why this sounded so funny. So we're kind of overwhelmed. We just had to change our website provider. So that was a whole big, couple months of a mess that we were in. We got that under control. We have a really good website person now. But no, we just have not had the time, or let's say the energy, to take on anything new.
No, absolutely. You guys are always busy. I was, as the filmmaker, spent a lot of time with you and with Cindy Casey. It's seeing you guys put together the conference and all the events that you do and all the conferences you visit on behalf of Morgellons disease patients. I know how busy you guys are. Not to on top of that, you have to deal with the symptoms of Morgellons disease, and particularly Cindy's. I think has a tough time trying to fit all that in while being ill. But perhaps moving forward, as maybe this film, these types of conversations that we're now having, can be a catalyst to reapproach the CDC. Let's hope.
Right. What we mainly need are more people that are willing to help us, and I don't mean just temporarily. I mean willing to help us for the long run. I see Katie Yussuf has got her face on here. She's really good at writing, and really good at writing medical stuff, and so we intend to use her. We haven't brought her fully on board yet, but she's going to be probably writing a blog for us, and maybe we'll get her to harass the CDC because she would be really good at it.
Hi, Katie.
Hi.
So you've been involved with Morgellons disease advocacy for a long time. How did you get started, and how have you seen the movement grow or change?
Are you talking to me?
I'm talking to you. Is now a good time? Because I just pulled you up on stage, essentially.
Oh my gosh. Hi, Nancy, and hi, everybody.
Hi, Katie.
Yeah, the Charles Holman Foundation has given me so many opportunities, pretty much to save my life. And then the conferences, I have a big bandage on my chin. That's why I'm looking so cool with my thing right now.
You still look pretty.
Thank you. I'm trying to cook dinner too. This is my first Zoom, so I'm a little bit awkward. But
this is classic coronavirus, stay at home and do a Zoom kind of activity. I think everybody can relate to this.
Yeah. But thank you so much for doing this. In the beginning, I was so, that fight or flight thing was so powerful, with the infection. And going to the conferences, and learning, really saved my life, and allowed my kids to really have a present mom. And then through it, I've had 14 online friends pass away from suicide due to this, and but I've seen a lot of growth, even just in my 5 years of being involved. I think I've had symptoms for almost 6 years now, and some of those symptoms were like in childhood, even a couple of them that I can trace back, some of the milder symptoms. But I've seen a lot of growth, and I'm just so excited to start to see feedback from your film and everything. Thanks for having me.
Me too. Yeah, thank you. Let's take another question. So here's one with three upvotes. It's from Tracy Bruce. Did we answer this? I think we may have. Oh, actually, it says, I took my $20 digital handheld scope to my doctor's appointment with my laptop. Within 5 minutes, he saw real time when he headed to see. He ordered every test under the sun and is sending me to a myriad of specialists at Duke. He insisted I take my scope and computer to all the appointments. My question is, why has this idea not been presented in the literature that outlines how to approach your doctor about Morgellons? Simple, affordable, and a quick way to show you the doc to get their attention. So that's a good question. I think
I can
folks,
answer that.
yeah, go right ahead.
Because most doctors, she's just lucky she hit a sympathetic one. Because
Exactly.
there are those that you take out that handheld microscope and you ask them to look, and they would construe that as a matchbox sign. They would say that you're, delusional, trying to show them a specimen, even though it's not in a box and it's not something you've collected. They would probably view that as a signal of mental illness, unfortunately.
I definitely agree with you. But my doctor's been with me for almost 20 years. So he saw me before and after, and I have that relationship established that a lot of people do not. So I understand that. But the thing is that you have to incite your passive badass, and you don't ask them to look through the scope. You are paying the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
You are paying them. You make them look through the scope. It took 5 minutes. And you have to insist. It is not, you do not ask. You're not going to get anywhere that way.
I've heard many patients have success to getting their doctor to listen if they bring in one of the peer-reviewed papers, and then the doctors are more likely to listen. I
have another strategy with that. Is it working? I don't know.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Hi. Sorry, I'm new to this too. So on Amazon, I don't know who makes them, but like for $8, there's a little scope that clips onto your phone, and it works great. And I bought several of those. And if I go to the doctor, I give them as a gift. I give them one. And they love it because they're really cool. And I don't know why all dermatologists don't have one anyway, but what's different about what they usually use is you can see, you see it together at the same time. You're seeing it on your phone, or if I bring my iPad, that's a nice good size, and we're both seeing it at the same time. And they do like it when you gift them anything, people. So, but I don't have a lot going in and demanding things, because then they write me off as nuts from the get-go. I go in presenting, hey, I've got this cool little scope. I want to try it. I want you to see it. I brought one for you. Sometimes I've had luck with that. I just don't have the nerve to visit enough dermatologists lately. I gotta work on that.
I had to be very passive and almost manipulative. I had it all loaded up. And so when I walked in, I literally opened my computer and bam, there it was, and ready to go. So he didn't even I didn't have to be insistent or anything. I just said, I need you to look at this. And he didn't have time to say no, because I had it in front of his eyes before he could say no.
Well, that sounds like a good strategy, Tracy, where you weren't insistent about it, but you somehow got it right there. It's kind of like a smoothness, because you don't want to put a doctor ill at ease. And I know Cindy Casey, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, Cindy Casey, the one and only, is joined us. This is a great technological feat for tonight, which has been just beset with technological nightmares. Cindy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me too. But I finally get logged into this.
Yeah. I don't know how long we can continue talking, because I may get kicked out of my office for having a giant Zoom chat while my wife, because we're working from home, is having sessions. She's a therapist, and she needs like quiet when she's on the doing sessions virtually next door to me. So we'll keep on going until we get kicked out. I just wanted to put that out there. But
Pi, I had a quick question just for those folks. Just out of curiosity, very quickly, do your scopes do they look under the skin as well, or is it just a close? Can you see the fibers that are underneath the skin?
I got a $19.99 scope off of Amazon, and it's 100 power, and you can see the fibers under the skin.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the one I get's like $8, but when it's on your phone with the zoom, you can see everything pretty well with it.
Yeah, because one day Pi showed up at my house with the camera guy in one of those scopes, and the one that he had was pretty high powered, and I remembered it took us all of like 100 seconds to locate subcutaneous fibers,
Yeah,
like blue
yeah.
and red ones. So anyway, back to you, Pi. Sorry for the interruption there.
No worries. I just wanted to give Cindy the floor and just ask her a basic question, which I know a lot of people are curious about. And it's, you know, Cindy, most people have seen the film, so they know your story. Where are we now with Morgellons disease and the Charles E. Holman Morgellons Disease Foundation, since we stopped filming that documentary in 2018? Now it's 2020, March or April, actually, April. Where are we now? Cindy, can you hear me?
Well, we know a lot more about Morgellons now than what we used to know. And so that's been really good. And more people are getting treated and getting better. And we don't seem to see the horrible cases like we used to see. So that's been progress. And what do you mean by where are we right now?
Well, has there been any progress
movement?
Since 2018, since we were shooting, or is it kind of a holding pattern? And how are you doing health-wise? I guess a lot of people would want to know.
Well, that's progress since 2018. Just recently, there was a paper published that showed intracellular infection, which we didn't know about at all before. And it showed that our macrophages, the actual cells that we depend upon, you know, as part of our immune system, that they are actually intracellularly infected in some of the worst cases of Morgellons. So there's been research published since, you know, in the past couple of years, at least one paper, probably two or more maybe. And with me, I'm a lot better than what I used to be. I used to have lesions all over me like you saw in the film. And now I just have like one or two small lesions. So it's tolerable. I still deal with some brain fog and fatigue and that kind of thing, but my skin being so much better makes a world of difference. So I'm a lot more functional than I used to be.
That's great to hear. There's a question that we can answer here.
Actually, there's been 3 papers. No.
I'll say again, Cindy. Well, let's take the next question here. It says, since a dermatologist would typically be the first line.
There's actually been 3 papers published since the film.
Okay, great. Sounds like we have quite a delay coming out of East Texas. So the question is, since a dermatologist would typically be the first line doctor an individual with Morgellons would see, how can we get the dermatology community engaged in helping solve this condition?
I think we talked about this one.
We did indeed. So let's find another question, shall we? Cindy, was there anything that you wanted to talk to folks about that are here in the chat while I search for another question, since you're just joining us?
I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but if somebody asks a question, that'll prompt me.
Edward, did you talk yet about where you are at with your brother, Ryan Hu, since the movie?
No,
we talked about it last night in the Q&A, but I think folks here might also be interested.
Yeah. So my brother and I get along great again. The film was, it was really interesting because Pi got a hold of me and introduced me to the concept of the documentary that he was putting together at the time that Brian and I were at our worst that we've ever been. And I think the reconciliation process would have happened without the documentary, but probably not with the speed and to the extent that it actually did. And I'm really happy about that, because there were times when he and I probably wouldn't have been prompted to talk about this, except that Pi would and his and the film crew would sort of prompt us to do so. So I would say, hey, Pi, I'm visiting my brother. I'm going to be down in LA. And he'd say, great, I'm going to be there with a camera if that's cool with you. And I said, of course. And so at a couple points where maybe my brother and I just would have been silent, we were being posed questions about how we felt about it and moving on. So he and I get along great now. He's got, I think while near the end of the filming is when his second kid was born, and so I'm an active and happy uncle with 2-year-old Ellie. Yeah, we get along great. We talk often. I just was texting him yesterday or the day before. He's turned around in his view on Morgellons after having seen the film. And for those of you who went to the film premiere in LA, which was a fantastic event, you got to see and meet him and hear him answer questions. He's a really personable guy. And I hope also that, the portrayal of him and the Morgellons community, getting to meet him, helps personalize the other side of the story, because, here we're sitting on one side with the knowledge, with the patients, and the other side is physicians, which a lot of times we kind of get into this habit of demonizing. And my brother is one of the most compassionate, kindest people. He's in the medical field because he genuinely cares. So I'm hoping what it does is it represents and it causes us to be a microcosm of what's going to happen in the future with the greater medical and the Morgellons community. But he's doing great, and we get along great, and he knows Morgellons is a bacterially caused illness now.
Well, that's great that he's, so on board. And also I saw him at the premiere here in Los Angeles in October at the Awareness Film Festival. And I commended him. I was like, because Brian, you really had the most to lose out of everybody who participated in the film.
That's right.
Your relationship with your brother, and also your reputation as somebody who's, a doctor who didn't really believe in this disease, because, as a filmmaker, we could have portrayed him as more of a villain if we wanted to. You have that, capability as a filmmaker to color how someone understands or how someone is portrayed. And I worked very hard to kind of portray it in a balanced way, to give both sides of the issue, and also to leave the door open, like you're talking about, of making him the microcosm of the macrocosm. So doctors aren't evil if they don't believe you, but there's a worldwide prejudice that needs to be overcome, and we're starting to turn that page. And I think it's like with any prejudice, right? There's a prejudice against Morgellons disease, and in this country, there used to be this country used to be much more racist and much more sexist, and those prejudices have turned to whatever extent is debatable, but it's definitely turned since look at the 1920s, and now we're in 2020, and I think we can do that with prejudice against diseases that are unrecognized as of yet. We can start to understand the new evidence and the suffering that people are going through. Mm-hmm. Because in the end, you can't, a lot of folks ask me like, hey, why don't we just, not show both sides and just shout people down when they say Morgellons is not real? And it's because we have to turn together with people, right? You have to change someone's heart so they can change their mind. And we need to, it's like with ulcers, right? Like, hey, we can all recognize that when I was a kid, I thought ulcers were caused by stress. That's what I was taught. And now I know they're not. So the world allowed me to change my mind, and we can allow the world to change its mind about Morgellons disease. Now, there's, just to go back to the questions real quick, there's one about brain fog, right? And I think brain fog and other neurological symptoms of Morgellons disease can be particularly confounding to those suffering from it, but also to those witnessing it, because sometimes neurological symptoms can be misconstrued as evidence of a purely psychological disease. Mm-hmm. So maybe Cindy and Edward and Marianne, you guys could comment on that, because I know you've experienced it and or studied it. Oh,
You're on mute, Marianne. It looks like
Marianne,
you're
I've got you on
talking.
mute. Hold on. All right, there you go.
Oh, Pi muted me. He didn't want me to talk. Oh.
Well, it was there gets a lot of feedback. I can hear people's like dogs and neighbors and whatnot and family members in the background.
I just wanted to mention that the neurological symptoms of Morgellons, it has nothing to do with the skin and everything to do with the fact that there's a systemic infection involved. So I just want patients to remember that. It's a systemic infection with Borrelia and other co-involved organisms that is causing the neurological symptoms.
So, Edward, did you suffer from neurological symptoms when you were struggling with Morgellons disease, and how did they resolve?
Yes, I did pretty bad ones. There were, I think, and like you said, it doesn't help because sometimes when people see the outward manifestation of the infection, they assume that when they see a psychiatric symptom that it's a psychiatric illness purely. So there were times when, at least as far as I can tell now, I had symptoms of psychosis, definitely. I had terrible memory issues, brain fog. I was unable to complete sentences. I would leave the stove on. It's just basic cognitive functions like finding words became a huge challenge and was extraordinarily frustrating. I had other neurological symptoms too, like nerve pain, some motor skill difficulty or motor control difficulty. And for a while, I didn't have a steady gait. I wasn't able to walk right. So it definitely went into its I guess, final stages or more serious stages neurologically. How well did they resolve? Almost completely. So in terms of the like the nerve pain, the motor control, all of that is back. A couple years after being off the antibiotics and other drugs, I have all of that function back with none of it, as far as I can tell, being permanently compromised. I do from time to time have some difficulty with memory or cognitive functions, and it's fairly minimal. So I would say I'm like 90% of the time I'm 100% back. So there is that small amount of time where I still feel that difficulty. I'll reach for a word that used to come very easily, and it won't be there. Or most embarrassingly, I'll be talking to somebody and then all of a sudden my mind will just blank and I'll have no recollection of what we're talking about. Sometimes I can't recall the person's name or even their face, and it's really disturbing, and you kind of have to fake it for a little bit until your mind catches up. So from time to time I will have those, but I am thankful that I got serious intervention and medical treatment at the time that I did, because I could tell you, if it happened any later, I'd be suffering from more of those consequences, because I'm just sort of at the end where like I caught it and I only suffer from a little of them now.
Well, Cindy, I know it's going to take a while for this message to reach East Texas and hear it, so we'll give you the last word on this question and have it be the last question, which is about neurological symptoms and what kinds of things you struggled with as far as brain fog and neurological symptoms, and how you're doing now. And Cindy, did you hear my question?
Hi, Gracie. No.
Oh, my question is about brain fog. So what kind of symptoms did you suffer from, and did they resolve in any way?
Yeah, I had like short-term memory loss, like I forget where I put my keys, I forget, where are my glasses, that kind of thing. And even back when I was working, and this was where it really got scary. I was a critical care nurse, and I would forget, did I put that potassium in that IV already? And then I couldn't remember, so I'd have to start all over again from the beginning and redo everything, and so it gets time consuming, but looking for stuff and redoing everything, just short-term memory stuff, it seems like that has improved somewhat. I still have problems and issues with it sometimes, especially when I'm tired. When I'm tired, the symptoms kind of creep back around. But for the most part, I think that does clear up for most people, at least some with treatment.
That's great to hear. Okay. Well, this has been a challenging technical endeavor tonight, where we started on Crowdcast and kind of shifted over here to Zoom. I will put this up on our Facebook page as imperfect Q&A as it's been, but that's kind of par for the course here in the land of coronavirus, where everybody's kind of getting online and you get to see everybody's home. That's been kind of the fun thing for me on my day job, is to see everybody's cats and dogs and kids. But I wanted to thank everybody, not just the speakers. I'm talking about Cindy Casey and Edward Hu and Marianne Middelveen, who have dedicated so much time to educating people about Morgellons disease. But I also wanted to thank everybody who joined us with their questions, and apologize for the technical difficulties. I hope we can make tomorrow night's Q&A on Crowdcast work. I'm sure Crowdcast support and I will have a nice conversation tomorrow morning, so that we can get back up and do that great platform for Q&A. And you'll be able to submit questions there. And you can always research more about Morgellons disease at morgellonsdisease.org and the CEHF.org. That is the Charles E. Holman Foundation.org, which is Cindy Casey's organization.
You're done?
Hi, Martha. Yes, we're done. And thank you all for coming, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow night. And please share the film with people. I know its goal is to get the conversation started with those who may not be believers in Morgellons disease, so that we can turn the tide there. And also, it can be a way for you, if you suffer from Morgellons disease, to kind of legitimize your message to family members or physicians by saying, hey, I'm not going to try to convince you about Morgellons disease, but here's a documentary. It's being released by Gravitas Ventures worldwide. Take a look at this. This isn't my film. I didn't make it. And that sometimes helps to legitimize messages, is giving another third-person party to advocate for you, and which the film is designed to do. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Also, don't forget, you can watch Tuesday's question and answer, which is posted through crowdcast.io/Pi Ware. Navigate to past events, and there's an hour-long session with me, Pi, and Dr. Ginger Safely.
Yeah,
So
very
thanks
true.
everybody
Thanks,
for
Edward. And it's
participating.
also on Facebook as well, on our Facebook page at facebook.com/MorgellonsMovie. And also check out our website at morgellonsmovie.org. Thank you all.
Thanks, Pi. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Marianne. Bye, Cindy.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thanks.